Welcome to Now in the 90s, where we look at the game releases of 30 years ago today. This week, another Disney afternoon hit, Sega's premier strategy game, and RPG Fish Bites. Hi, I'm your host Jared, and today is July 7th, 1993. We Always Stick Together, Best Friends Forever, released in July 1993 for the Super Nintendo, was Goof Troop. Goof Troop is a top-down adventure puzzle game. Play as Goofy or his son Max and defeat all of the dastardly pirates that have taken over. Throw objects, kick blocks, and use a variety of gadgets to defeat enemies. The gadgets can also be used to solve puzzles like crossing gaps or pressing switches, defeat some bosses at the end of the levels, and of course, play the whole game in two-player co-op. Goof Troop the video game is based on Goof Troop the cartoon series, which aired on the awesome Disney afternoon block of cartoons, perfectly sandwiched between Bonkers and Gargoyles. The animated series premiered in late 1992 with 65 episodes going into 1993, and of course, would eventually lead into the Goofy movie in 1995, which still slaps. Goof Troop the video game is based heavily on that cartoon, mostly. Goofy and Max were out fishing with his frenemy neighbor Pete and his son PJ, who then get kidnapped by pirates. But then the final boss of the game is Keelhaul Pete, who is a different Pete than his neighbor. The whole thing gets, it gets goofy. The video game was developed by Capcom, who also has done several surprisingly good Disney video games. Goof Troop comes hot on the heels of Magical Quest starring Mickey Mouse and DuckTales 2. One of the designers of the Goof Troop game was a young Shinji Mikami, the same guy who would go on to create the Resident Evil series. The game is an underrated co-op adventure. If you want something retro to play with a friend and don't mind friendly fire every now and then, seriously, pop in Goof Troop. Reviews at the time were very positive. Nintendo Power scored it with an average score of a 3.5 out of 5. GamePro magazine awarded it solid 4s out of 5 in every category, and Electronic Gaming Monthly awarded it a 7.75 out of 10, only really disliking how easy it is. Unlike many other Capcom Disney games though, Goof Troop has never been ported. It is not a part of the Disney Afternoon Collection for modern consoles or any kind of virtual console release. Goof Troop is only available for the Super Nintendo. An overlooked RPG gets a sequel and a new genre. Released in July 1993, was Shining Force for the Sega Genesis. Shining Force is a turn-based strategy RPG. Battles take place on a grid-like map, allowing you to move your units into position, setting yourself up for attacks and casting spells. Attacks then zoom in for dynamic battle scenes as the action plays out, showing you the results. Units can gain experience points, level up, and can have their class promoted to a more powerful option. There is still exploration modes, allowing you to walk around town, talk to NPCs for information, purchase new equipment, and find hidden treasures. Defeat all of the evil forces to prevent them from summoning the Dark Dragon. Shining Force is actually a sequel to Shining in the Darkness, another Sega Genesis RPG that's a typical first-person dungeon crawler that was released in 1991. That game was a big success for Sega, especially since their 16-bit console was a bit starved for RPG games. Since Shining in the Darkness made Sega a lot of money, for the sequel Shining Force, Sega said, spend as little money as possible. Main game designer Hiroyuki Takahashi explained in an interview in 2010 that the original Shining in the Darkness was made on minimal budget, and then Sega did not increase their funding when it came to Shining Force or the eventual Shining Force 2. He explained that at the time, RPGs were made so that they could tell a good and interesting story. Takahashi said, sure, that's true, but he really felt that there needed to be more engaging battles, saying they needed to be, quote, enjoyable and worthwhile. He took inspiration from the Japanese PC game Silver Ghost, in which you have a large party with a wide variety of characters, and applied that for Shining Force. Contrary to popular belief, Shining Force was not created in response to Nintendo's successful Fire Emblem series, which was only in Japan at the time. Takahashi even scoffed at the notion of it, stating, quote, the tempo of that game was so bad that it wasn't even something that I wanted to play. Sick burn. The Genesis was not known as an RPG system, despite having some great ones on it like Shining Force. Thus, coverage for the game was surprisingly minimal. It got a pretty bad magazine advertisement, but that's about it. Not a whole lot for preview or in-depth walkthroughs. The only American magazine review we could find for it was in GamePro magazine, rating it highly for how fun and engaging it was, but not loving the presentation. UK magazine Megaplay stated much of the same, rating it with a 73% score. Shining Force then went on to do super well. It sold tons of copies in Japan and decently in the West, and more than made up for its shoestring budget. So when it came to another sequel with Shining Force 2, Sega told Takahashi and his team, still no money. This friction and disregard would cause Takahashi to leave Sega in 1994 to form his own company, but one that would continue to create the Shining Force series. That company is called Camelot, and they're also the team that would go on to create Mario Tennis, Mario Golf, and Golden Sun. As for Shining Force, if you want to play it right now, you can, as it's available on the Nintendo Switch online library for the Sega Genesis. Of all the well-known, beloved RPGs for the Super Nintendo, this is not one of them. Released in July 1993 was E.V.O. Search for Eden. E.V.O. Search for Eden is a side-scrolling action RPG. Begin life as a fish in the prehistoric ocean, eating your way up to the top of the food chain. Earn evolution points, allowing you to upgrade yourself with new body parts for stronger attacks and new abilities. Start as a fish, but eventually make your way to land as an amphibian, then a mammal, a bird, eventually a human, all while biting and eating everything you can for enough points to evolve. Become the apex of all life and go to Eden, a paradise with the ethereal Gaia. E.V.O. was published by Enix and developed by the studio Almanac, who by this time is best known for that dumb Sega Genesis fighting game Fighting Masters. E.V.O. is actually a sequel/spiritual successor to a game they've already made titled E.V.O. The Theory of Evolution for PC 98 computers in Japan. That game was more of a turn-based RPG, but had the same elements of attacking other animals until you could evolve. While developing E.V.O., Almanac also had actual local school teachers come in to teach the programmers some basic biology and geology lessons, which I assume they mostly disregarded, so that you could make unoptimized monstrosities. Enix handled everything about the game's release in North America, including translation and marketing. EGM Magazine first previewed it in issue 46, where it was originally listed for a March 1993 release. Nintendo Power issue 49 had it set for a May 1993 release, but the game wouldn't finally come out until July 1993. It's not clear what caused so many staggered delays, though it likely didn't inspire much consumer confidence. Maybe it was for the contest? Enix held a contest in the United States where players can make whatever creature and/or abomination they can, take a picture of it, and send it in. They would select 5 winners, and they each got a free game of their choice from ActRaiser, Soul Blazer, Dragon Quest III, or Dragon Quest IV. I have no idea if this ever happened or if winners were ever selected. If you're out there and you won this contest, please let us know. This sounds awesome. The reviews for E.V.O. Search for Eden were not very enthusiastic. Nintendo Power reviewed it with an average score of a 3.5 out of 5, and GamePro magazine averaged a 3.25 out of 5, calling it a bit tedious. Which they're right, it's basically a lot of grinding for points to evolve and killing the same stuff over and over again. It's also a way longer game than you would think. It certainly is unique though. So unique, it's only on the Super Nintendo. E.V.O. The Search for Eden has never been re-released, ported, or remastered to any other console. Speaking of bizarre abominations, for everything else released this week, here's Editor Dylan.
Addams Family Pugsley's Scavenger Hunt released on the NES and Game Boy this week, and the biggest difference between those versions and the SNES version we covered back in February are Pugsley's cold, dead eyes. Oh my god!
Where are his eyes? I can see into my soul!
F15 Strike Eagle is yet another flight combat sim on the Game Boy. But unlike most Game Boy flight sims, this one leans far more towards the arcadey action take on the genre, which was the best possible move for the hardware. Since most people don't want intricate or nuanced simulation controls for the Game Boy games, they want pick up and play, which this game does better than most. It's also worth mentioning the music is noticeably better as well. It's just a shame they had to cut percussion to focus the remaining sound channels on effects. Luckily, its sequel, F15 Strike Eagle II, released on the Genesis this week. And right away it starts off with a great intro song to get you hyped up. What's baffling is once the game actually starts, this dark, atmospheric music changes the mood entirely. It really sells the gritty war is hell theme, which is fine, but again, I much prefer the more upbeat, action-y vibe of the intro. So it's just a bit misleading to opt for such a tonal shift during gameplay. Side tangent. Remember the first level in Super Castlevania 4 where the dark, moody intro starts to crescendo into one of the most masterful opening songs in the series? It perfectly encapsulates the moment it sinks in that you are now playing the next generation of Castlevania games. Boy, it hits right. I mention this because a whopping 67 seconds after the music starts in Strike Eagle II, out of nowhere comes this. Hell yeah, it's go time! I've never been partial to flight sims, and I've never played this one before. So maybe it's just a me thing, but whenever there is a sudden musical change in theme or mood during gameplay, it has such an impact on the moment that it can cause a personal connection with the experience as a whole. Final boss battles tend to do this a lot to great effect. Like in Earthbound or Final Fantasy VII when Sephiroth turns into a... Okay, maybe this was a bad example, but are there any other non-spoilery tonal shifts in games like that? Let me know, because it's such a nice surprise whenever it happens. 7 games released on these 5 consoles this week in 1993. Apologies for getting kinda deep with a song in a flight sim, but game releases in July of 93 is the epitome of 90s summer slim pickings. Only a handful of games released this month, and if you weren't fortunate enough to know about a few greats, it was either go outside or reach into your backlog like it was a part-time job. Psh, go outside. Like I don't have any sports games to try out. What a crazy concept. Okay, later, y'all.
Thank you, Dylan. Here in the Collector's Corner, Goof Troop hasn't quite sustained itself. You can find a copy of that game for about $24 or around $85 for a complete in-box copy. Shining Force is one of the higher Genesis games. It released costing $64.95, and now the game alone is still worth $50. Get that plastic box and manual, and then it's worth $110. This week's biggest value gainer, though, is easily E.V.O. It released costing $67.95, but has become so obscure and rare that the game itself is now worth $235. If you've collected the box and manual for it, then it's worth $650. And that's it for today. Next week, from the desert to the jungle, pirates on your Sega, and the return of Bub and Bob. I'm your host, Jared, and this was Now in the 90s. Thank you so much for watching Now in the 90s. I want to thank some patrons like Scott Foster, Ben Korenberg, and Spectate. Please like the video and leave a comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. If you already are a subscriber, thank you so much for watching this show every single Friday. If you want to try to support the show, please consider checking out our Patreon. A link is in the description down below. I love Goof Troop. I find E.V.O. to be okay. I've never played Shining Force. That's one of those RPG games that a lot of people tell me to play. Are they right? Should I play Shining Force? I don't know. I've never touched it.